Welcome back, everybody. I'm here again with Coach DJ. What's going on?
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. Today we were going to talk about Clomid and Enclomiphene versus HCG versus TRT, what we're kind of seeing in the market with these things.
Yes.
So I guess you see a lot more of this in practical use from people
So
inquiring about this
much.
stuff. I only know the science end of it. I don't get a lot of people using these things. So HCG a little bit, but so let's talk about why people are using enclomiphene versus traditional TRT.
I think whenever we discuss these before we start filming, it's always so funny to see the differences and the type of inquiries that we get and the questions and kind of what we're seeing on social media. From what I have seen, and I would say even when I just do live streams as Q&As, so many questions about enclomiphene. I would say upwards of over 50% of the questions I get are regarding enclomiphene specifically. And when we talk about the social media ads, which are obviously going to be heavily targeted for PEDs for either me or you, we see a lot of Monjaro, of course. We do see
No?
the TRT clinics, but enclomiphene is being marketed as basically the saving grace for any male that wants to increase their testosterone, that doesn't want to use needles and doesn't want to cause any HPG axis suppression, and they may value fertility. It's also being pushed towards younger males that are wanting to enhance their
Okay.
testosterone levels. And more recently, I'm now seeing it be prescribed in lieu of products like kisspeptin or HCG alongside testosterone to help prevent suppression.
Okay. It's interesting. So people know we're specifically talking about enclomiphene now, not Clomid. So
Yes.
enclomiphene is, for people that don't understand what it is, it's a non-steroidal selective estrogen receptor modulator. So a SERM similar to Novadex, tamoxifen. It acts by antagonizing the estrogen receptor in the pituitary gland. So it's a little bit different than Novadex, and it reduces the negative feedback by estrogen on the HPTA axis. So it will stimulate testosterone production. It's used as a women's fertility drug, similar to HCG, at least originally, right? That's what Clomid was at one point. And Clomid is a long-acting drug, and I believe that's why they came out with the stereoisomer enclomiphene, because it's much shorter acting, so you don't have to take, right? Because the dose, when you used regular Clomid, you didn't only have what was in you. With the current dose, you had the buildup of,
Yes.
and it would cause visual disturbances and other
And that's
stuff.
still being reported with the enclomiphene from what I'm being told. And what's interesting is I have, again, I don't have any clients that are utilizing this, but from what I understand, there are still physicians that are still using Clomid as a standalone, not
Okay.
just the enclomiphene. So, and I think the biggest concern with that would be um, the estrogenic effects from the zuclomiphene as well. I don't know the
Mhm.
actual percentage of each that's within the Clomid, but I've seen both as a standalone. And what's interesting and kind of where one of the things that I wanted to discuss was when people are utilizing it as a standalone, um, there's not a lot of conversations between clients and or patients and their physicians about the duration of use. And then again, we always go back to the circle of, what are they going to prescribe? What are they going to offer you in terms of performance enhancement? Then we start seeing people trying to implement oral only cycles with Anavar, utilizing this in lieu of a testosterone base. So really, we just kind of see it being used in place of a lot of different products that have a lot of different mechanisms of action.
It's really, yeah, it's odd. So it's not, Clomid is FDA approved, or clomiphene citrate is the name of the drug.
Mhm.
And clomiphene that we're specifically talking about is derived from clomiphene. Like you mentioned, there are two other parts as well. And so under the FDA, it's allowed to be compounded because it's part of an FDA approved drug. So it kind of fits in like a loophole. That that being said, it's like kind of an odd use to me. I I can understand the no needle thing, right? That seems to be the biggest play there, is guys are
Biggest
afraid of
draw for
needles.
sure.
And that's probably why before things like this, or you and I both have experience with people wanting to do things like Anavar only cycles as their first, as they dip their toe into the steroid pool because they're afraid of needles. Right. It's not that doing something like that, at least for a man, is super advantageous. In fact, if anything, it's probably detrimental to do that as a first cycle unless you're using super low dose. So I mean, I get that. I just think it's an odd, and young. There's no studies to show long term use, and I would be concerned with people in their 20s taking this stuff long term. to boost, right? I mean, so long extended periods of GnRH elevation. There's not like I said, there's no studies on enclomiphene being used long term, but we know that like an overproduction of GnRH can cause pituitary adenemas. So not really something that I would recommend people do. So pituitary adenema is a non-cancerous growth on your pituitary gland. That can lead to other, depending on where it is on the pituitary gland, it leads to all sorts of other endocrine issues. So not really something that I think, versus testosterone is relatively benign. There's not a whole lot of side effects associated with testosterone in a reasonable dose. It seems like a strange medical plan to put something on this.
I've
Right.
always found, I mean, and realistically, a lot of these compounds we're using off label. I mean, that's what we're doing with performance enhancement in general. But we understand testosterone at the end of the day. We have so much data. We have a very thorough understanding of what it does, what it can't do, any potential repercussions, how to mitigate that, and how we handle, if something does arise. Like, we understand testosterone use. We don't understand this. We're lacking the data. And my concern is that we are intentionally giving this to younger males that are going to have potential fertility needs. And on the surface, this seems like a very practical use of the compound. Like, hey, it keeps them off testosterone a little bit longer. They can optimize their levels. Like, I understand that. And they don't have to use a needle because everybody wants to avoid the needles. I get that. But we don't have the data on this. And especially enclomiphene as a standalone, we don't have information on it. So again, with those elevated levels for an extended period of time, we don't know the repercussions. And then doing this in young males that we know have potential or do have fertility needs in the future, that's a huge, huge risk. And no one I have spoken to has actually had a conversation with a prescriber about length of time that they can utilize this, or any of the safety aspects, because we just don't know about it right now.
And how do they mitigate this? They're doing, what's the prescribing details on this? It's like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off.
So with Clomid, I don't know how they're doing the Clomid cycles, but for enclomiphene, they're doing a cycling approach. Again, the draw to that is that you don't necessarily have the same estrogenic impact that you would with Clomid. So enclomiphene is a standalone, they are cycling. I have seen it done in 1 week on, 1 week off, 1 week on, 1 week off. It's a very, very short half-life. And then I have some clients that are doing, or not clients, people that have inquired with me, 2 days on, 2 days off, or even every other day protocols. So they are taking, it's never a straight dosage. It's not going to be something daily. And then
Okay.
I last night went live and I asked that, hey, if you're taking enclomiphene as a standalone, please send me messages. Why are you doing it? How did you get on it? Did you ask for it, or was it provided in lieu of testosterone? A lot of them inquired for testosterone replacement therapy or to enhance their testosterone levels. And because of their age, were given enclomiphene instead.
Because of their young age or old age? Young age, I'm guessing.
Because of, yes, they were young.
Okay.
So
'Cause I
they were
know.
basically refused testosterone and given this in lieu of that.
Okay. And they were tested first, and their serum or total testosterone was low. They were considered hypogonadal?
Not hypogonadal. These
Not.
are all, everyone's maybe not necessarily in ideal ranges, but they are just
Okay.
trying to capitalize on it and push
Okay.
to
Which again
lower
is,
super physiological ranges.
yeah, I mean, I'm not judging. It is what it is, I guess. But I get medically, it's odd that a doctor would write this then for someone who's clearly doesn't need it, right? Because you have primary hypogonadism and secondary hypogonadism. Something like Clomid or enclomiphene would usually be used for secondary when you have a failure, at the pituitary, not at the testicle. So, like, testosterone would typically be used because it'll just replace the whole thing that's lost. Versus this is like a very specific use. And if you don't have secondary hypogonadism, I'm not sure why this would be something you'd leverage. I would think if a doctor wanted to not abuse, but if a doctor wanted to basically use something for performance enhancement and kind of fly under the radar, they would just write for testosterone, right?
You would
It's not
think that
that
if they're trying to
regulated.
avoid, if they have concerns due to someone's age, that they wouldn't be giving a non-approved compound with lack of information to these guys.
And you don't, to me, not necessarily a straight comparison, but it would be like using MK677 for growth hormone versus growth hormone would be like using enclomiphene for testosterone. So you're limited by your body's natural production. You're just forcing a production out of a gland, but you're not, it can't really go above what your glands are capable of producing. So it's not going to make a super physiological amount, right? Like MK677 is not going to, you're not going to gain 30 pounds of muscle on MK677. Like it'll improve sleep, bone density, the basic things. That's why it's used in elderly, people with osteoporosis or children. It's on its way to becoming an FDA approved for children with delayed growth to avoid injections and avoid some of the side effects of growth hormone. Again, they're not trying to leverage something for performance versus the people that are going to the doctors for this stuff. They're looking for performance, right? They're clearly kids that don't need hormone help. They want hormone help. And it seems like an odd choice. Yeah. Cause it's like not really far below Nugenics in my mind, or whatever that silly supplement company is.
And now, as a result of this, we see a lot of teenagers taking it as well. And that almost seems to be the push. And of course, they're not directly targeting teenagers, but that ends up being what's happening as a result. And then, of course, you tell someone, hey, like this can get you into super physiological ranges. Technically, they pull labs, things are a little bit higher. Then we kind of venture into the territory of, okay, well, you have elevated testosterone levels now. People think they can utilize this in the same way that they would use a testosterone base when they start adding in secondary compounds. And again, this goes back to I don't want to inject, I want to use orals. And like even last night on the live, I had a lot of people that had said they had ran an Enclomiphene Anavar cycle. And like, I didn't even have to inject anything. I got great results. And again, because this isn't studied, I have a lot of questions around this, because I don't necessarily think that, especially with the way that they're prescribing the Enclomiphene, I don't think that is going to be enough to prevent suppression in conjunction with Anavar. It's not the same thing as a testosterone base. It's your endogenous production. There's a reason why you pair these things with a test base. That's not questioned anymore. That's pretty much just fact. That's how it is. Yeah. And then you have people starting to like, well, maybe I can run it with Anadrol. I can take it with Anavar. I can do all of these things. And look how much I can optimize my performance without ever having to inject, because I'm scared of needles.
Yeah. Well, and there's going to be a big difference in HPTA suppression with Anadrol versus Anavar, right? They're totally different things. Do you want me to explain like at least with Clomid, like how it works? Because it kind of explains.
Yeah, that we probably skipped over some of that.
So it's some of that. It's one of the two principal SERMs, which is a selective estrogen receptor modulator, and it would usually be used for the recovery of testosterone production after an anabolic steroid cycle. So traditionally, and this is until you and I spoke about this in a day or two ago, this was really my only understanding of the use for this drug. It was not something so I only know the research end of this and what it was used for previously in bodybuilding. I don't know anyone who's currently using it during or to replace, a cycle or as part of a cycle. So to kind of understand, I guess, how Clomid works, you have to understand how testosterone production is regulated. So it's regulated by the feedback loop that's not only for testosterone, but for other androgen levels and estrogen levels as well. And this feedback loop includes the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the testes, which is the HPTA axis. When the hypothalamus senses low estrogen levels and does not sense high androgen levels, this is where the Anavar thing kind of comes in. It stimulates to signal the pituitary gland to produce more LHRH, which stands for luteinizing hormone releasing hormone. Upon receiving the signal, the pituitary produces more LH, luteinizing hormone, which in turn signals the testes to produce more testosterone. During an anabolic steroid cycle, because you have super high androgen levels, this shuts down this process entirely. So if you were to add Anavar, something like Enclomiphene, even though Anavar is not very suppressive, it's still suppressive enough that it's going to shut down that process. Where it's going to vary is if it's for a short period of time, like 8 weeks, which again, I'm not sure why anyone would use something like Anavar or any oral for more than 8 weeks in a row. But with any steroid, if it's used for something like 6 to 8 weeks, it's generally the suppression is not going to be permanent. But the problem is over a long period of time, you start to get testicular atrophy, and this process just becomes worse and worse and worse. It becomes harder to kick back on. That's where things like HCG, and we mentioned HCG earlier, that's kind of where HCG then came into this, right? Was to avoid that whole process of the shrinkage. So Clomid, as does Novadex, it works by occupying a binding site at the estrogen receptors of cells without activating the receptor. So it's an antagonist. So an agonist is something that will bind to a receptor and cause gene transcription. An antagonist is something that will bind to a receptor in a similar way and basically block the actual hormone from being able to bind and cause that same transcription. So it's basically going to stop estrogen from binding to those receptors. In the case of the hypothalamus, it makes the hypothalamus basically come to a conclusion that estrogen levels are low because it's not sensing actual estrogen there. And as long as androgen levels are not elevated, which it should not be if you came off steroids or you were not on steroids to begin with, the hypothalamus then stimulates the LHRH, which will increase natural testosterone production. The problem is if you start adding other anabolics in here and you've shut the process down, the Enclomiphene can't counteract that whole process. So I'm not even sure what the thought process is. At that point, I would think you'd be better off just using testosterone. Because the other issue that I've not seen labs on this. I really have trouble believing that Enclomiphene on its own is going to get your testosterone levels above a super physiological level, right? It's going to put it in that range. Someone comes in and they see a doctor and the range is, 400 or 500 total. Maybe it'll get them to like 7 or 8 total. The bottom line is under 1400 nanograms per deciliter. There's no growth, like muscular growth that's occurring from testosterone on its own anyway. So there's no way that anyone's LH production is going to get them to 1400 nanograms. The highest, I'm not going to get the exact number right. The highest ever tested human that was natural was something like 1100 nanograms. There was one person ever. I don't think there's anyone really ever been over 1000 naturally. So
I think in terms of performance enhancement in general, relying on endogenous production is simply not how you get optimal results. At the end of the day, if you're going to start manipulating your body, you bring in exogenous compounds at that point, and ones that are pretty well understood as well. And now, because of this, and this is what's mind blowing to me, because I've seen HCG monotherapy. Like that's something we have more data on. Still would prefer testosterone to that, but we do see HCG monotherapy. The issue now is we have TRT being prescribed alongside Enclomiphene in lieu of kisspeptin, gonadorelin, or HCG. And I have not seen those labs, so I can't speak on what those numbers look like. But again, it's insane to me that if you're already injecting, because at that point it's not going to be a needle aversion. You're already injecting your testosterone. So I don't see why we would take a compound that's less understood with more potential side effects at that and utilize that in lieu of something that we've been using forever.
Yeah, it's not been studied.
And I've seen more of that than HCG or kisspeptin.
So odd. And I like you said, I understand HCG usage, not something again that I advocate as a first line. I think when people have this as a complaint or they want to have children or something, and HCG has value there, I don't think it's something that needs to be used. A lot of doctors want to use HCG as like a prophylactic, like continuously. HCG also comes with its own set of side effects as well, because it is technically estrogenic. The other problem, to continue what I was saying before about the levels, is even if Enclomiphene could get you to super physiological levels or HCG or any of these ways to bypass using testosterone, the problem is your body seeks homeostasis. So if a man injects 600 milligrams of testosterone, he does that for a year. Whatever his blood level at 600 milligrams becomes the homeostatic level now. So now there's no further growth unless the milligrams go up, right? Between homeostasis and regulatory factors like myostatin or ones that we don't even know yet, you're just not going to continue to grow and be the same with Enclomiphene. So even if you were slightly hypogonadal and getting your testosterone level up slightly with good diet and exercise and stuff would cause some muscle growth, how long is that going to last before it just taps out again? It seems like such a waste of time to me. Right.
What's concerning is that this is, and again, from what I'm seeing men that are ditching testosterone replacement therapy entirely and opting for Enclomiphene. And it usually comes down to injections. They don't like doing the injections, but I'm literally seeing people that are abandoning their TRT. And that's a lot of the feedback that I got last night was maybe someone had, trouble. They had like blood viscosity issues or blood pressure issues. There was something, and their physicians didn't want them on testosterone. So this was the next course of action, rather than working on maybe lifestyle factors that could improve a lot of those things along with the testosterone that they were taking. No one wants to do that. That's no fun. They just took what they were calling like the magic pill now. And it's for a while, I follow advertisements very closely. I pay a lot of attention to that. Also, it's probably because I'm one of those people that loves infomercials. So I pay attention. But I will say, the TRT clinics were really vocal about this for a while, saying like this is not superior. You don't want to do this. And there were ad campaigns basically saying, stay away from this. Now I'm seeing that the TRT clinics are making this their bread and butter. They're pushing it. They're like, do you want all the benefits of TRT? Do you want lower risks? Do you want all the benefits with no
Risk.
injections?
How do you
For a
even say
pill
that?
every other day, you can feel like a new you, feel like you felt when you were 21. And it's insane how the ads have changed. And all of the clinics that were trying to push testosterone replacement therapy as a superior method, which it is, in my opinion, are now really capitalizing on the enclomiphene trend. And I just think it's crazy to push something so hard that's lacking data.
Well, yeah, I don't know how they can even say it has less side effects. It's not been studied in that respect.
And half the messages I got that of men that were on it, they liked it. They felt good. Like it was an enjoyable thing. But a lot of them reported that eye floaters, and they're like, I had to get off of it.
Yeah.
Like I didn't have a choice.
Well, that was the issue with Clomid, right? Headaches. There's all sorts of side effects of Clomid, and because it was long acting, that's one of the reasons why they were looking at other things like Enclomiphene. I know that there's a lot of people in like physicians or people in the medical community that are anti the use of exogenous testosterone, right? They were not taught properly about these things, and they automatically just assume abuse instead of hormone replacement therapy. So I kind of get that. And then on the other hand, people that want to avoid needles, but as a full replacement strategy, it just seems really silly to me.
So, in your opinion, do you think that this will be something that will continue to grow in popularity and continue replacing testosterone? Or do you think at some point we're going to end up with some data where we're pulling back on it?
I would assume we're going to get data that's going to be contrary to using it. It's possible that it's popular now as well because HCG, the issues with HCG has gone up in cost as the compounding pharmacies, similar to what you and I talked about with Ozempic and those drugs. So the compound pharmacies are not really either able to make it or the cost is very, very high, where HCG used to be cheap and now it's very expensive and hard to get. So it's possible that doctors are also pushing this because the supposed anti-suppression effects of it. I would just think as a hormone replacement therapy, though, it's kind of I would think it's a failure.
Where do you see room for this having like a lot of potential and being helpful? Or maybe like in lieu of where we're traditionally using Clomid, do you see a spot on the market where this would be really beneficial versus Clomid? Because I know how I utilize it, and it's not something that we implement frequently at all.
No, I mean, I think versus traditional Clomid, I like the idea that it's got a short half-life. I think that's the benefit there. I think outside of what it was traditionally used for recovery in a situation where you need to recover that axis, I think it has value. I personally don't see any other use for it. It's not something I would use. I wouldn't, again, I guess in theory, you could run it in place of Novadex if you were going that route, although I'm not necessarily, I would personally use an AI instead of a SERM. That's me. I don't know how often you recommend things like Novadex. It's not really a first line thing for me either.
No,
I would
not
rather
often.
lower serum estradiol than just block a receptor. Yeah. So outside of like what it was traditionally used for, and I would, and again, and then if someone is worried about like testicular function, I would typically go to HCG over enclomiphene. And again, and like you and I talked about off camera, I don't typically find that a concern. I don't think that most men really suffer from that level of testicular shrinkage from using TRT. I think it's more of a mental thing. And I'm also not sure what the big deal is. Like, I'm not sure why men want them to be. They seem like there would be in
It's
the way.
always one or the
Well,
other. Yeah.
yeah,
You
it seems
either
so
are
strange to
very,
me.
very concerned or you could care less. I mean, it's you're never in the middle about it.
Yeah, it's very odd, but that's a personal choice. But I would probably opt for HCG in that case. You just have to watch the estrogen. I think I just feel like enclomiphene's not been studied in that capacity long term. I don't think I personally, it's not something that I would reach for.
Well, I think we're going to start seeing. I'm eager to see if you start getting questions regarding this as well.
We will after
I'm
this.
shocked that you haven't. And everyone that asks me, I wish I had more information on it. I wish I had something of value. But at the end of the day, and this is where I think it's really important. I'm glad we did this because I am set in my ways. I'm stubborn. I should be more objective. Unfortunately, I'm not. We have data on testosterone. Use testosterone. Maybe
Yeah,
you're not at a point where you're a great candidate for it, but at the end of the day, testosterone is superior. And even if we do, learn a lot about this compound and it does show promise, and maybe we can utilize it in different contexts or with testosterone, regardless of how it's being used, even if it shows promise, I'm still going out for testosterone replacement therapy. So I'm stubborn. So it's important that I can have this conversation with someone that can be a little more objective.
yeah. I mean, I'm with you though. I don't really find any failure in using testosterone as a hormone replacement therapy since it's bioidentical. I don't know. I don't. That's not something that I find concerning because we're not talking about abuse here. We're talking about actual medical use for it. I don't. It's been 1936 or something. I'm not really sure that something's going to come along now all of a sudden and replace it.
And I want to point out too, for a lot of the men that told me that they have opted for enclomiphene, some of the reasoning didn't necessarily have to do with a needle aversion, but it was a matter of, I don't want to be on it the rest of my life. And whether you are taking a compound to increase endogenous production or you're introducing it exogenously and it is having a suppressive effect, it's still a lifelong commitment. When you come off of it, you don't maintain those levels that you
No.
reached while you were on it. And I think that's something that people don't necessarily think about that in any context. It's a lifelong commitment. Even just using over the counter supplements, you don't maintain that. It's not changing anything. You have to stay on that, whether it's a capsule a day that you buy at Walmart, or if it's enclomiphene every other day, or it's twice weekly
Testosterone.
injections.
Yeah,
It is
and
a
I've
lifelong
never.
commitment if you want to maintain it.
Yeah, and you can disagree if you've seen the opposite. I have yet to meet someone who I get people that ask me the same thing. They say, "Well, what if I start testosterone and I want to stop?" I've yet to meet anyone that wanted to stop. So I'm not really sure why that's even. I understand the question. I've just in practicality, I've not seen it. I'm not sure why you'd want to once you're there.
Yeah,
I think
you're not ever
before you're
going
there,
to go
perhaps you think about maybe I
backwards.
don't want to use a needle for the rest of my life, but I guess once you realize the benefits of it, I don't know why you would ever want to stop. I'd say that would be like most things. I've yet to meet anyone outside of cost issues. The same with growth hormone. Like I've not met anyone who used growth hormone that was then like, not really my thing. I'm going to stop.
And that's one of the conversations I have with clients too, especially if they're making that decision to
And
start
once you start,
testosterone. And I'm like, yeah, we can technically do things to help prevent suppression, but at the end of the day, like you're not going to be enhanced and then be like, well, I'd like to go back to being
no,
normal now. Like that's not going to happen. So it's opening Pandora's box. It will be a lifelong commitment in one way or another, even if it's not like a physiological dependence. You're going to want to stay on it.
yeah, 100%. I don't know anyone who would think the opposite. Cool, DJ. Well, I thank you for coming on and having this
Thank you very
conversation.
much for having
Yeah,
me.
definitely. So yeah, we will talk soon. Take care.
Thank you.